Welcome to the first Garden State Immigration Policy Institute, a joint project of the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition and the New Jersey Business and Industry Association. I am Catherine Kish, Executive Director of Einstein's Alley, one of the founding organizations of the 36-member Business Immigration Coalition. As we all know, the federal government makes U.S. immigration policy. However, state political leaders, and even more important, state business leaders, can call attention to the importance of immigration to our communities and to New Jersey's economic life, and thereby spotlight the need for changes and sensible policies. In order to do that, business leaders need to be informed. That is what this Garden State Immigration Policy Institute will do, as it serves as the educational arm of the coalition. It will provide a series of public programs on various aspects of immigration policy. This morning's inaugural program, which is generously sponsored by the Genova Burns Law Firm, is on a subject that is front and center for many New Jersey businesses: easing labor shortages in New Jersey and on the role of immigration in doing just that. There are 11 million unfilled jobs in the United States and only 5.5 million available workers. There are places in New Jersey colleges and universities that should be filled with talent from abroad, but these students are going elsewhere. There are companies that could employ New Jersey workers that are not being started here by foreign entrepreneurs who are going to other countries to start these businesses. We will have a panel of New Jersey industry representatives and several national experts to talk about this situation and how we might improve it through sensible immigration policies. We are going to ask you to weigh in too. Put your questions and ideas in the chat throughout our discussion. And now to introduce our keynote speaker is Dr. Nick Montalto, President of Diversity Dynamics, who holds a doctorate in American Immigrant and Ethnic History from the University of Minnesota. And he was a longtime president and CEO of the International Institute of New Jersey and is a founder and coordinator of the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition. Nick?
Thank you so much, Catherine. You have been a leading voice for immigration reform and one of the primary catalysts in developing the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition. So thank you for the role that you've played. My friends, I have the great honor of introducing our keynote speaker for today's program, Muzaffar Chishti. Muz, as he's known to his friends, has been a creative and highly respected thinker and researcher in the field of immigration policy. He currently serves as a researcher and senior fellow at the Migration Policy Institute and director of the Institute's office at the NYU School of Law. For those of you who are not familiar with the Migration Policy Institute, I think it's fair to say it is the largest and most influential nonpartisan research center on immigration in the entire country. And in fact, when we try to develop our positions on immigration policy issues, very often we're relying on the research that's been done by MPI. Moose has numerous publications to his credit, many of which deal with the intersection of labor and immigration law. He has testified extensively on immigration policy issues before Congress and is frequently quoted in the media. He has served as chair of the National Immigration Forum and the National Immigration Law Center, and currently serves on the boards of the New York Immigration Coalition and the Asian American Federation. Moose is originally from Kashmir in India. He was educated at St. Stephen's College in Delhi and the University of Delhi, Cornell Law School, and the Columbia School of International Affairs. There's much more I could say about Moose, but I'm going to let it go there. Thank you for joining us today, Moose, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I just want to acknowledge our long friendship and being colleagues with Nick since I entered the immigration field. He's been one of the pillars of the immigration field in the last 3 decades, and I'm so glad to have known him, and I'm so glad to be joining all of you this morning for this very important conversation. So my job here is to provide a national perspective and frame for the job, which some may think is a local New Jersey issue, but it is highly linked to the national challenge on immigration. And just coming straight to the subject of our conversation, which is sort of what is the state of labor market, especially when it's connected to immigration today. We all know, I mean, immigration is a polarizing issue. We know that we have never been more polarized on this issue than we are today. But let me just clearly state that there are fundamental agreements on facts. There are even a lot of agreement on what policy should be. And there is, what is missing is political will to make it happen. So I'll focus on the facts and the policy options, and then we can, in the rough and tumble of the discussion later on, get into politics if we want to. I will try to stay away from politics for the time being. There is almost universal recognition that we have a labor shortage in this country. And it is, to me, based principally on 3 factors. First, the nature of our economy has changed in the last 30 years. We have moved on from a manufacturing economy to a service sector economy, which has created huge shortages in some principal sectors of the service, which is elder care, home care, health care, also in agriculture and part of housing. Second is that we have become an aging society. We are getting trappings of the European societies and of Japan. I think it sort of will surprise no one that 10,000 baby boomers are retiring a day. All the baby boomers will reach the over age of 65 by 2030. Demographers tell us that by 2035, there'll be more people in our country who are over the age of 65 than under the age of 18. That demographer is considered an important milestone in the demographic picture of a country. So we all know this is a looming aging crisis of the country. Not only has it obviously huge implications for the labor market participation, also for our social security system, because if all the retiring baby boomers have to be supported, we need a robust social security system which doesn't go bankrupt, for which we need active young workers to be contributing. So it's a crisis not only from the labor market perspective, but for the solvency of our social security system. The third, which is a much less appreciated phenomenon, is that we have also become a more educated society. Like at the beginning of the 20th century, only about 10% Americans graduated high school. Today, about 85% Americans graduate high school. That's obviously very good news for the country, but it has implications in the labor market. Because if you're a high school graduate, your ambition is not to work in a dead-end, low-paying job. Your ambition is to doing something more, which will be sort of more lasting and pays much more. And that's sort of, we have therefore this new mismatch between skills, aspirations, and job opportunities. So everyone sort of, there's agreement on the need for a more robust stream of labor, of workers entering the labor market. And the obvious answer would be, well, immigration does it. For an aging society, we need more immigrants to come in. And here, therefore, we need an immigration system which responds to that need. And I think there's no other way of describing it. We have a broken immigration system to respond to this need. And the basic reason for that broken immigration system is that it's based on an architecture which is founded in 1952. We have the Immigration Nationality Act, which is still sort of the broad framework of our immigration, which was written just after the Cold War. It's as old as the Cold War since we're entering a new Cold War. It has been revised only slightly since then in 1965, in 1986, and 1990. And I call those, even those attempts, sort of slight tinkering with our immigration system. So we have a really old, archaic immigration system to deal with. Now, to make it sort of vivid for what that means in the context of shortages, despite all the lack of understanding on immigration across party lines, we still admit about 1 million people to the country as permanent legal immigrants. And that has actually remained true in the last 2 decades, from 2001 to the last year, average of 1,000. There were slight dips in 2003 and 2004, some in 2013. There was then a big sharp decline in 2017, but that was largely because we had a huge peak immigration in 2016. Even in the Trump era, the immigration levels did not drop significantly, except in the last year of the administration, which I attribute more to the pandemic-driven measures in processing immigrants. So in this 1 million average green card holders a year, 2/3 of these people are selected on the basis of their family connections. Only about 15% of our immigration is based on recognized, acknowledged, demonstrated, needed skills in the country. And this is therefore 140,000 of these green cards are reserved for people who are coming on the basis of labor market needs. And that includes their family members. So therefore, it's in effect, only 7% of our annual admissions are based on the recognized labor market needs of the country. That just does not make sense. I mean, that would not make sense to anyone on the political spectrum, from a Trump supporter to, pick your choice, for an Elizabeth Warren supporter. And therein lies the connection of low and very small pathways for legal entry. And this affects much more in the low-skilled occupations, because only 10,000 visas are reserved for the low-skilled occupations. That's your connection to why we have such a large unauthorized population in the country, close to 11 million today, because people coming to do the jobs that we badly need in our country, especially in the low-wage sector, in the absence of legal pathways, they're choosing unauthorized, illegal pathways. So in a way, you could say that the laws of supply and demand are working magically, except that unlawful pathways are being used is against legal pathways for entering the labor market. On the other high end of the labor market, we have people coming in high-skilled occupations. But there's so few opportunities there that those avenues are backlogged for years. If you're an Indian or a Chinese immigrant with a job from IBM or Google, even with a PhD, you would be waiting years in the backlogs to be able to get a green card. So the combination of the illegal incentive for illegal immigration, the clogged arteries in our legal immigration, is what many of us would call the broken immigration system. So we at the Migration Policy Institute have said that we really need to rethink the way we select people in a fundamental way. And our approach is that we should think about a new visa, which is we've chosen to call it a bridge visa for the time being, which bridges two things. On one hand, it bridges the spectrum of occupations. And let me make another less appreciated point here. Of the people who get employed on immigrant-based visas, 80% of them are adjusted in the United States. That means they move from a current non-immigrant category like student to an immigrant country through something like in-between H-1B programs. And actually, last time we looked, about 80% of the people who actually do adjust are either H-1s or L-1s. L-1s are people who are intra-company transfers. So therefore, these new H-1B visas are what we would call, demographers call, the new seed immigrants. These are the people who form the new immigrants coming. And then, as I made the connection about the family early on, they will then be sponsoring their family members, which is the future of immigration. So the future of our immigration is dependent on the people today we take on H-1Bs and a little sprinkling of L-1s. Now, we have looked at who comes on H-1B visas. About 50% of people who come on H-1B visas are based on computer skilled occupations. So those are not to pass any judgment on this. The future of our immigration is going to be children and descendants of computer engineers or computer-based occupations. That is just a reality. So therefore, many people who are in the other occupations are eased out of the legal entries to the US. So therefore, that's why we have thought that we should have a bridge visa, which cuts across the spectrum of occupations. So everyone from low skills to high skills and in between middle skills should be able to apply for a bridge visa. And under the bridge visa, you are sponsored by an immigrant. You come for 3 years. We have to test the labor market so that no US worker is unemployed or their wages and working conditions are undermined. And through a robust labor certification process, we certify someone that you can come to the United States on a bridge visa. Our present labor certification system is a joke. It's really based only to make, frankly, immigration lawyer that I am, many of us rich and sort of have sustained income. It doesn't serve either the foreign workers or the domestic workers who are looking for a job. That has to change. We're also suggesting that we have a pre-certified labor certification system for some employers who are habitual, good, law-abiding employers, both on immigration and labor side, should be allowed to sponsor people on a pre-certification basis if they have a good record in the past. Then after 3 years of being in the bridge visa, people get a choice that you can apply for 3 more years of a bridge visa, or you can actually return to your country of origin and a few years later come on another bridge visa. At the end of 6 years, you have to make a choice. You either decide to return to your country of origin and then come back later for another stint as a bridge worker, or you graduate into permanent residence. We think that this system introduces the circularity in immigration. That we believe actually that today a large number of immigrants do not necessarily want to make US their home forever. They want to come and work legally and travel legally. Our present system just doesn't allow that to happen. Once you come to the country, you have to burn your bridges abroad. That, I think, is just going against the grain of how people think about their lives today. So therefore, this will allow that circularity of immigration. The second point in this, and critical, is that we should have flexibility in how many people we take in. As I said earlier, we haven't changed our selection system since 1990. I mean, we change our interest rates every quarter, and which is also labor market impact. How do we not change immigration numbers for such long periods of time? So we are arguing in this restructuring that we should have an independent body of experts, not lawmakers and lobbyists, but labor market analysts, fiscal policy analysts who look at the real labor market needs of the country. They should do this assessment every 2 years, present it to Congress, and that should become the number for the next 2 following years. This is what we call the flexibility in our selection system. So we believe that if we introduce these 2 concepts of flexibility and circularity, we will actually have a selection system which is much more based on the reality of the labor market needs of the country as against an archaic system based in 1952. So let me just conclude here and glad to take questions in our panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. A very intriguing presentation. Next, I'd like to introduce Patrick McGovern, a partner at the Genova Burns. Genova Burns is today's webinar sponsor. He's chair of the Employee Benefits and Executive Compensation ERISA practice, as well as a member of the Employment Law and Litigation, Labor Law, Immigration Law, and Wage and Hour Compliance practice groups. He represents management in labor, employment, benefits, and immigration matters for Genova Burns. Before joining the firm, Mr. McGovern was in-house counsel at Allied Corporation, Allied Signal, Inc., and Honeywell International. Pat will be introducing and moderating our panel today. So Pat, I hope you are with us.
Good morning, and can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Good morning, all. Pat McGovern here, and it is my great pleasure to introduce the members of our distinguished panel this morning. We have on our panel Elizabeth Gill, who is Director of International Employment and Immigration at Montclair State University, which is one of the member organizations of the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition. The university has about 3,000 employees and over 20,000 students. Elizabeth has 15 years of experience in the field of international higher education and has a wealth of experience navigating the regulations that apply to work visas for university faculty and staff, from F&J visas to H&O visas to immigrant visas. Also on our panel is Lori Jenssen, who is Executive Director of the New Jersey Nursery and Landscape Association. Lori has been an important force in promoting the economic value of New Jersey's green industry. She has also called attention to the importance of seasonal foreign labor in meeting the labor force needs of her members through what's called the H-2B program. Also on our panel is Tamar Frolickstein-Appel. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm hearing some feedback here. Tamar is Senior Employment Services Associate and Healthcare Career Community Lead at Upwardly Global, where she has worked for more than 9 years. Tamar's work involves coaching skilled immigrants and refugees as they launch their professional careers in the U.S. She also leads the healthcare career community that's developing relationships and systems to better support internationally trained healthcare professionals across the U.S. Our fourth panelist is Aaron Price, the President and Chief Executive Officer of TechUnited, an organization representing over 500,000 innovators and some of the largest tech companies in the country. Previously, Aaron was the founder and Chief Executive Officer of Propelify, one of the largest entrepreneurial communities in the country, and now operating under the umbrella of TechUnited. The Propelify conference attracts some 5,000 members of the innovation community to its annual gathering in Hoboken. And I've been asked to just to remind attendees as we proceed, if you have questions for the speakers, please access the chat room and insert or type your questions in at the chat room, and be sure to direct the questions to entire audience so that Nick, who is standing by, can ensure that the questions are directed to the speakers today. So without any further ado, let me start with some general questions, and let's start with Lori. Lori, if I could ask you to explain why you and your stakeholders believe immigration reform is needed to ease the labor shortages New Jersey is experiencing.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. So the landscape industry is the largest user of the H-2B visa program by a significant margin. And the lack of H-2B workers during the past few years has forced landscape businesses to turn away customers, scale back service, and even cancel planned capital equipment purchases. So in some cases, businesses were forced to lay off American workers whose jobs are supported by the H-2B workers, or shut down their operations entirely. So we expect reduced capital expenditures, additional layoffs, and business closures in 22 and 23 if cap relief is not secured. The H-2B visa program is pivotal to the success of many landscape companies due to the seasonality and type of available work. So fewer H-2B visas coincide with fewer jobs for Americans. 2022 research found that a drop in H-2B program admissions in a specific community did not boost the labor opportunities for U.S. workers, but rather it worsened that opportunity. The program supports many upstream and downstream jobs. Every H-2B worker is estimated to create 4.64 American jobs. So the H-2B visa program allows landscape companies to hire well-compensated foreign workers only when domestic workers are not available for the work. And the need must be certified first. So employers need to publicize and pay prevailing wages, and they must hire any qualified American workers first. In a typical example, and this is from the Small Business Administration's Office of Advocacy, reports a landscape company that advertised an H-2B job, 25 openings. 25 U.S. workers applied, 3 showed up for interviews, and only 2 lasted more than 2 weeks on the job. So the New Jersey Nursery and Landscape Association, we represent hundreds of businesses in New Jersey encompassing all aspects of the green industry, greenhouse growers, landscape companies, garden centers, And one of our key roles in supporting the green industry in New Jersey is advocacy. So due to the pandemic, we are already battling supply chain issues, climate change, climate issues, and still continuing to battle to find labor. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. And let me pose the same question to Tamar. Tamar, why do you and your stakeholders believe immigration reform is needed to ease labor shortages in the healthcare sector? And are there specific policy solutions that would be beneficial to the sector that you represent?
Thanks. Sorry. Definitely. So we are absolutely in favor of immigration reform, but our work really focuses on the ground. Upwardly Global is a national organization that supports skilled professional immigrants in all fields, and we have offices in New York, Chicago, DC, and San Francisco. And as mentioned, I lead the healthcare work. And our work with these skilled immigrants, refugees, asylees shows that even once they are in the United States, especially in healthcare, which is such a highly regulated field, they face so many barriers. We have well-established needs in healthcare, from the very basic entry level, working as a nursing assistant in nursing homes and hospitals, all the way up to our doctors, specifically in primary care. And once these immigrants and refugees come to the US, they face extremely high barriers to get licensed in the US because of the nature of the fields being so highly regulated. At Upwardly Global, we work with folks who are doctors, dentists, nurses, pharmacists, physical therapists, lab techs, and everyone has a very different pathway to licensure, but overall it can be very challenging. The majority of our healthcare job seekers that we support are doctors. I could go into detail, but I won't here, but regardless to say, it is very challenging to relicense as a doctor in the US. And we're looking at alternative pathways at the state level. We're part of national coalitions that work to identify these opportunities. Some of the really exciting models are in Washington State that has a limited licensure law. A group of us are advocating in the state of Illinois, and I could go into some more detail about some of the work we're doing with our state legislature and the Illinois Department of Professional and Financial Regulation to really look at different alternative pathways to help these very high-skilled, experienced professionals who have a great understanding of public health, of working in low-income communities and disadvantaged communities, working with other pandemics, to help make sure that they're able to serve in the United States and address the challenges we have here. So I can go into more detail later at the questions, but that's some of the work. We really want to see not only more immigrants being allowed in the US, but more pathways for our skilled and trained immigrants to get professional jobs so they can support their families and contribute to the great need here in the United States.
Thank you, Tamar. Let me pose the same questions to Aaron. Aaron, why do you and your technology stakeholders believe that immigration reform could ease the labor shortages that New Jersey is experiencing in your sector? And what, if any, are the specific policy solutions that could address these challenges?
Well, thank you for having me. We do agree that reform is needed. And I want to point out that the founder of Zoom itself was denied a visa 8 times. The platform we're using today to gather was himself denied a visa many times over before finally making his way to the country. So, you know, in our case, not only do we believe we need it for the economic impact and for the desperate need of workers in the tech industry, immigrants also culturally often are drawn to the startup industry because of their, in many cases, desire to do something different and better for themselves and their family. And so, you know, 55% of what are called the unicorn companies, the $1 billion or decacorn $10 billion companies in the tech industry are founded or have a CEO who is an immigrant, him or herself. So we believe it's not just important for the labor issue, but it's also culturally relevant to the future of the economy, which we believe is led by tech. Whether you're specifically in a tech business and you build something with technology and software and hardware, or in our view, all industries are tech or are empowered by the tech industry, and that someone had mentioned earlier, the future of this country, I believe it was Moose, around service economy, is what tech often enables. And so when you look at not just immigrant founders and those employed at startups, but also immigrants at the educational institutions, that's often where the employment base starts. And so there's only 85,000 H-1B visa applications. It's oversubscribed dramatically. I think it's over 300,000 applications. So we're dramatically oversubscribed there. We do believe that reform is desperately needed, and that New Jersey is well positioned, especially post-pandemic, to be a welcoming hub of a lot of this immigration or a lot of this immigrant population for those who we're now seeing are not as interested in being in New York City, but are interested in being around New York City. And so, I won't share any specific opportunities, but we want to, or policy changes, as I mentioned earlier. This is not, we're still growing this muscle set within our community, but we do believe reform is desperately needed, and we're looking at other states to see what models exist, because a lot of this labor is needed to populate the dramatically growing tech community. And in New Jersey, we'll miss the boat if we're not able to fill a lot of these jobs.
And has your organization taken any steps to bring this issue to the attention of congressional representatives, local leaders, or the public? And what kind of feedback are you getting?
Yes, we have. We're still on the information gathering side from our members to see specifically what policy issues they're interested in pursuing. And for the most part, people are talking about just increase the volume of H-1B visas because we need more people. And we have spoken to several congressional leaders who are open to the discussion, but it's still early. It's in the earlier stages in our community, and sort of the information gathering side of things.
Okay, real good. Let me turn to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, perhaps, at least from your perspective, higher ed is not facing the kind of labor shortages that the other sectors are experiencing, but are there specific immigration policy solutions that, in your mind, would be beneficial to higher education in New Jersey?
Yeah, so we've talked about a lot of different work-based visas so far, and I can talk a bit about those and how they affect higher ed as well. But something I think that's important to address as well is the situation with undocumented workers. And I'll explain why this relates to higher ed. So Muz already referred to this population of people a bit. We know that, some information we have historically, DACA was founded in 2012 under the Obama administration, but it was created through a memorandum issued by Secretary Napolitano. It wasn't created through changing the Code of Federal Regulations, which, as Ms. pointed out, hasn't been changed much in a very, very long time. So there is currently a proposed rule in process for DACA, but at present, the July 2021 decision in the state of Texas et al. Versus United States is still standing, which means that people who would normally be eligible for DACA cannot receive approval for initial DACA applications. Ironically, the USCIS website says DHS will continue to accept the filing of both initial and renewal DACA requests, etc. However, DHS is prohibited from granting initial DACA requests and accompanying requests for employment. So basically saying, we'll take your DACA application, but we're not going to be able to do anything with it because of this decision that's still affecting all of this. So how does DACA connect to higher ed? DACA there's a huge population of undocumented students who are attending colleges and universities in this country, especially in certain areas. And those are in that category of young people that Moose referred to that could be excellent feeders into the labor market. So this is sort of a labor market related question as well. But those people, those young people are not getting utilized because they can go to college, and in states that are in the lucky situation that we have here in New Jersey, those students can get in-state tuition if they meet certain criteria. They can get financial aid if they meet certain criteria. But after, you know, a very successful college career, those students are not going to be able to go out and work in their field unless they're doing find some sort of employer who's going to be able to pay them under the table, because they're not going to be able to get legal work authorization unless they're some of those lucky few that had already gotten an EAD, an employment authorization document, so they have a work card, or they can renew it. And then there are a number of people that, even if this court decision weren't in place, would not be eligible for DACA at all, because there are so many requirements that have to be met. So undocumented students are this big group of people that are important to the labor market that aren't, you know, we're not necessarily thinking about them in that way, but they're there. So as far as advocacy efforts, Montclair State University signed on to the amicus brief that came out in 2018. It was started by Audible, Prudential, and Sanofi, US Services, and then a number of other organizations signed on, including New Jersey Business and Industry Association and the New Jersey State Chamber of Commerce, to try to advocate on behalf of DACA. And we've done other things as a university as well. So that's one policy change that obviously is constantly front and center in the news in the US. It's been through constant changes. It's you know, been flopped around by every wind of legal change and you know, attempt to create some sort of pathway for dreamers. But then of course we've got this other huge group of undocumented people in the United States that wouldn't even qualify. As far as international faculty and staff employment in higher education is concerned, we are in a lucky situation because we are not subject to the cap, most of us, because most universities and colleges are nonprofit, and therefore we can file H-1Bs at any time. And we're also in the fortunate situation of getting to use the permanent residence process. That's a subcategory of the EB2. It's a labor certification process referred to as special handling that's only available to college and university teachers. However, as Moose pointed out, the labor certification process is quite a mess a lot of the time. And this is one of those areas where we could really do for some changes that would have a really positive impact on colleges and universities. And that is that the labor certification for this category has to be filed within 18 months of the offer date. And so when you think about the process for hiring international faculty, that's usually happening early in the spring each year, but then the faculty don't actually begin work until the fall, so like around September the 1st of that year. So basically you're looking at filing for a prevailing wage as soon as people start work. Before we've even gotten to know them as employees, we're having to commit or not commit to the permanent residence process. So for brand new employees. So that would be a great change for us as well.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Before we pivot over to some more specific questions, let me just remind our audience that we're setting aside about 10 minutes for questions at the end of the formal presentation. So if you've got questions, please take a moment to type them up, put them in the chat room, and direct them to the entire audience so that we give Nick something to do. And he's always looking for things to do. Let me move over to the more specific questions that we have for our panelists. Tamara, let me tee this one up for you. Upglow points out that immigration reform requires more than creating legal channels for qualified foreign talent to enter the U.S., and that successful integration of foreign workers into the economy can require other reforms, perhaps at the state and local level. Can you elaborate a little bit on what those reforms might be? And I do recall at the end of your initial comments, you said you were interested in perhaps elaborating on some of those comments as well. So please share with us for the next 5 minutes what those thoughts might be.
Sure, thanks. Absolutely, I think I alluded that it's not just a question of bringing people in, but it's once we have people here, how do we utilize their skills, their experience, their training, and make sure that both from their point of view, they're living a professional life, they're making a professional salary, and that from the United States point, we're reaping the benefits of those skills and experience and training. So as I mentioned, also healthcare is highly, highly regulated. Upwardly Global, I put our website in the chat. We work with people in all professions, but what we've learned is specifically in the healthcare space, because it's so highly regulated, there's need to really look at some of the laws at the state level in terms of licensing. Generally speaking, in the United States, for a doctor that's trained internationally to license as a doctor in the US, they have to take all the US MLAs, the medical licensing exams, and then they have to get some US clinical experience, which can be very challenging. It can be very expensive or complicated to find an opportunity to work clinically in the US, very much related to our insurance system. And then the real barrier is that they have to apply for a US residency, even if they've already completed a residency and practiced medicine for a number of years, any number of years abroad. So what happens is they're competing with young American grads who are straight out of US medical schools, who look a specific way that hospitals expect them to look. They don't look like a 40-year-old doctor from Ethiopia or a 35-year-old Iraqi doctor. And so they're competing in a pretty unfair advantage. And there just simply aren't enough residency spots for everyone. So roughly 50 to 60% of international medical grads who get that far to even apply match for residency. So one of the areas we could look at as a country is to look at some alternative residencies or alternative processes. We certainly do not think doctors should practice in the United States who are not qualified, but if a doctor can prove by passing the United States medical licensing exams, by getting some clinical experience, couldn't there be a different way to integrate them? I mentioned in the state, a couple states have looked at alternatives in Missouri, and also recently in Washington state, they created a limited license where a doctor who trained internationally and passed all the USMLEs and got certified by the ECFMG, which is the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Grads. Sorry, lots of acronyms in this world. Then they can practice under a limited license for a number of years. And also other states are looking at this. Colorado has some, Massachusetts has some new legislation, and I'm very involved because in Illinois, where I live, we have started through some volunteer connections at Upwardly Global to connect with a local legislator and have a bill that recently passed and was signed by Governor Pritzker that's going to create a task force to look at this issue and to suggest maybe some alternatives. So we're really, really excited about this opportunity. There is a national coalition that is housed by WES, World Education Services, called Impact, that has working on leading this effort across the country. Because as I say, the licensing happens at the state level, but we want to stay coordinated and make sure that, you know, that as one state's learning lessons, we're teaching them and sharing them across the country. So, so that's some of the areas that we're looking at. A lot of this came out of some COVID response and realizing the huge shortage of healthcare professionals that we do have, and trying to figure out ways to address this.
Thank you, Tamar. Let me turn it back to Aaron, if I could. And Aaron, some of your earlier comments anticipated the next couple of questions to you. Have the recent changes to the H-1B visa application process chilled the appetite that high-tech companies have had for the H-1B visa? Has the industry pivoted and found alternative successful pathways to hire high-tech workers? And in what areas is your industry perhaps suffering as a result of the current visa limits, and as you described, certainly the oversubscription in application for the H-1B?
The industry continues to suffer. Hiring in the tech industry is the #1 pain point that we hear about. Finding talent is it's very, very competitive, and salaries continue to increase. For early stage companies, it makes it particularly difficult because the #1 recipient of the H-1B right now is Amazon, with basically an unlimited purse. And so if you're struggling for talent in your early stage company, you're limited on resources, it's difficult to compete. The H-1B visa is a pathway that I think many tech companies still see as an important is an important part of the tool set that helps them grow their workforce. And like I said, that the #1 again issue of frustration is the number of denials that are coming in here because of the cap, the $85,000 person cap on recipients. And so that's the issue that we hear the most of. Hiring in general is the issue we hear the most about. How do we, in New Jersey in particular, where we export a lot of our college grads, we're trying to figure out how do we make sure we can keep them here. And I think these things play together, sort of to Elizabeth's point earlier, on making sure that there's an environment that allows people to legally, not just legally stay and become employed, but have a pathway to some sustainable and comfortable life here. And so I think that our ability, this is often a high-paid workforce that creates economic value, and that also often goes on and starts other companies and drives additional economic value. And so if we can have more of those, the more immigrants stay and be employed in New Jersey, we think that's a very important win. So as I mentioned before, we're still kind of in the information gathering stage and less so the proposing new ideas stage, but that has been by far the most important issue to our community.
Thank you, Aaron. Let me turn back to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, many people in the higher education community have been calling for the development of a national immigration strategy for international education. Do you think such a strategy will bring benefits to the overall economy? And if so, why? If not, why?
So, short answer is yes, I do think that. I think that the data backs that up, and I'm going to answer your question from the international student side of things, because as mentioned before, international students are a huge feeder into the H-1B program. So the international student categories, there are 3 of them, the M, the F, and the J visa, but by and large, international students are in that F category, or also known, well, its technical term is F1, so we call them F1 students. So most of the students that I'm going to talk about are F1 students, although there are plenty of J and M students as well. So NAFSA is the professional organization, so that's NAFSA, NAFSA, that handles, or that is, working on behalf of all international educators in the US and abroad. So it's an international organization as well. Probably the largest of its kind, and it does a huge amount of advocacy work and data gathering and information sharing in that field. So I'm going to give you some information gathered by NAFSA to kind of get a sense of what we're looking at in terms of economic impact. So these numbers are from the 2020 to 2021 academic year. As you can recall, that was the pandemic year, the first full pandemic academic year. There was a 15% decrease in international student enrollment that year. So these numbers, think of these numbers in light of that. So nationally, international students that year contributed $28.4 billion to the US economy, and they supported 306,308 jobs in the United States. For New Jersey, the contribution was, our slice of that pie was $61.71 million, and international students supported 6,913 of our jobs here. So that, I feel like those numbers are very clear on their own. But there's something that we really need to be aware of with regard to international students coming to the US, and that's the decline that has been occurring. So this is some data from Project Atlas, and I'm just going to read it to you. Since 2001, the number of students pursuing education outside of their home country has more than doubled, from 2.1 million to 5.3 million, while the US share of this globally mobile student population dropped from 28% in 2001 to 21% in 2019. NAFSA estimates the continued decline in new international student enrollment since fall 2016 has cost the US economy $11.8 billion and more than 65,000 jobs. So that's a huge, huge impact that the decline in enrollment has had for us as a nation. International students have been surveyed in the recent past. There was a survey of 1,300 international respondents, and they indicated the main reason for their decreased desire to study in the United States is that they perceive the United States to be less welcoming toward international students. That's a kind of generic description, less welcoming. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how other countries are welcoming. Some of the big feeders for international students throughout the world are Australia, Canada, and China. So let's see what they're doing. Australia. So foreign students can work for up to 18 months after graduation. Our standard work time is 12 months if you're not in a STEM field here. Graduates of certain high need occupations are able to work longer for up to 4 years. We don't have that at all. In 2018, Australia saw an increase of 15% in international student enrollment. And in 2019, the government announced students who study and remain in certain regional areas will receive an additional year on their post-study work visa. Canada. Following graduation, foreign students in Canada can work for a time period equal to the period of time they studied in Canada. So if you were a PhD student and you spent 6 years studying, then you could work for 6 years theoretically, but there's actually a maximum here for 3 years. 3 years is still great, and it doesn't require that second application or for you to be in a STEM field like it is required in the United States. So in the US, we have optional practical training for F1 students, that group of international students that I mentioned before. The automatically available period of time for OPT or optional practical training is 12 months. If you're in a STEM field, then you would be eligible to apply for a couple more years of OPT, but there are all these hoops that you have to jump through. For instance, your employer has to be registered in the E-Verify system, and they have to be willing to certify a number of things about your job, which some employers are not willing to do. So in China, foreign students graduating with a master's degree or above are immediately eligible to apply for work visas within 1 year of graduation. And in 2008, China set a target of bringing 500,000 foreign students to its shores by 2020. and China is on track to meet this goal. Now, this study that I'm reading to you from was done in March of 2020, so at the very beginning of the pandemic. And I forgot to mention one more thing about Canada. Work experience considered skilled helps graduates qualify for legal residence in Canada. In 2018, international enrollment increased by 16% in Canada. So these are really convincing numbers related to really interesting and aggressive efforts on behalf of these countries to recruit actively for international students. So
yeah, very interesting, Elizabeth. Let me turn it over to Lori. Lori, do you see relief for hiring temporary seasonal foreign labor as the primary solution for your industry's labor issues, or are there other immigration reforms that would also benefit the industry? For instance, should temporary visa recipients on H-2Bs have a pathway to acquire permanent U.S. residence? Is there even a demand for this? What are your thoughts in this regard?
Okay, all right, good question. So as the primary solution in capital letters, absolutely, because again, the seasonality of our work demonstrates that need. Who here in the United States or in New Jersey really wants to have a full-time job but only work, a partial season? Not many of us want that. Well, maybe we want it, but we can't afford it. So, and just think of what the agricultural sector here in New Jersey brings to us, right? Not only with landscaping as far as private and publicly owned properties, agricultural, right? We all love our corn, our Jersey corn, Jersey tomatoes. All those things happen because of our ability to have seasonal workers. So just a real quick example of that need, if you will. Back in January of 2022, the Department of Labor announced that it received over 7,800 applications requesting 136,555 worker positions for that April 1st, second cap start date. It's a 41% increase in years before. That's unheard of. So the need is absolutely there. The thing is also with that timing is our season, like think of our growing season, and certainly in landscaping, our season begins in March. So if they're allocating additional visas in April, by the time those workers get here, our season's halfway over. So that's a big problem. So some of the reforms that we need definitely go around or are part of that Returning Worker Exemption Act. What that says, I think it was back in 2019 that came on board. And we're hoping to reenact that because it will exempt returning workers that have already been here against that cap. Okay. And if they've been a worker in the last 3 previous years, they would be able to be exempt from that cap. They'd be allowed to come back. Some of the other provisions, and this is part of the reform that I think is important for certainly our industry, is got to modernize the application process, create additional worker protection members, and strengthen the integrity measures by increasing fines and possible disbarment for reckless or misconduct by employers. We're looking out for these workers. Some of the workers that come back year after year to some of our members, they're part of their family. So we're really looking to protect them, protect the employers. Would love to be able to have the ability to hire those workers year after year and kind of have that knowledge that they're going to be able to get that. It's very difficult for a landscape company to say, contracts for the next season are usually signed the year before. But if they don't know what kind of employment or labor field they're going to have, how many people they're going to have, it's very hard for them to sign contracts or even to fulfill those contracts. So definitely the answer, the solution for us is immigration reform, and really to kind of put things in order that's doable for the industry. I hope that answers your question.
Very good. Yeah, very informative. Thank you. I want to thank the panel. We have some time for questions. At this point, I'm going to turn it back to Nick, who will field some questions and direct them to our speakers and our panelists. Nick?
Thank you, Pat, and thank the members of the panel for some tremendous insights here. And I think what you've all reinforced is the need for immigration reform in so many different areas. I guess we have just several questions to bring to your attention. One is, what can the business community do in order to apply pressure on our elected officials to consider various aspects of immigration reform? Well, of course, we formed a coalition in New Jersey, and we're trying to advance immigration reform by mobilizing the strength of the local business community. But I guess above and beyond that, do you have any ideas about how business can be more forthcoming, more effective in agitating for immigration reform in Washington? And by the way, Musa has joined us and is also available to answer any questions you might have. So let me throw that question out to all of you. Anyone want to take that? Musa,
Well, sure, let me just take the first crack at it. I think the issue, as I said early on, that there is political paralysis on this issue. For a variety of reasons, Republicans and Democrats are not able to come to a consensus on this. And if one body of Congress agrees, the other body doesn't. We had a very significant bill that passed the Senate with like 68 votes, which happens on very few things these days, in 2013, and it died in Congress. It was not even brought up for a vote. So electoral politics plays a lot of role in this, and we all understand that. We can't be naive about it. So my feeling is that you have to look at this on a short-term and on long-term basis. I think to have a significant, big, robust change in immigration is not in the cards for any time soon. I think it probably is not in the cards till after 2025, after the next presidential election, till we see how the politics at the White House and Congress that shapes. But I think in the meantime, we can certainly aspire for certain small bore successes. And as Elizabeth pointed out, the issue of dreamers, I think, is high on the list. You have to look at sort of sympathetic subgroups of the unauthorized population for the first bite. I think dreamers are high on that list. And there's a lot of support for dreamers. I mean, almost no member of Congress will tell you, I want dreamers to be deported. But when it comes to actually doing something about it, they find one reason or another not to do it. So far, what they have been allowed the leeway is courts. Courts have basically kept DACA alive so far. It reached even the Supreme Court, and even this Supreme Court said that President Trump's attempt to get rid of DACA was not lawful. So it's on sort of life support system, mostly as a result of action by courts. But as Elizabeth rightly pointed out, that is now up for grabs. The cases before the Fifth Circuit is reasonably conservative on these issues. I would be surprised if they don't uphold Judge Hannon's earlier decision of saying that DACA is unlawful. If that goes to Supreme Court, again, which I think is likely, and Supreme Court says DACA is unlawful, then members of Congress can no longer push the can down the road. They finally will have to meet the moment of truth. Okay, the courts can't save you any longer. What are you going to do? And my feeling is that moment of truth may come if the Supreme Court decides not to find DACA lawful. So that's one point. But I think even before that, I detect above all other pieces that there may be chance of just getting DACA legislated, or what you would call small dreamer bill. And I think there is some Republican support for that. My feeling is this is one of the things that may be a candidate for a lame duck session after the election. There is some movement among some senators for that kind of a small bore bill. I would say that for the time being, as much pressure as we can put for those small items to go in a bill that may come either just before Congress ends or in the lame duck. It's an effort that Senator Cornyn, Senator Tillis on the Republican side, with Senator Durbin and Senator Padilla on the Democratic side, are working on. This is actually the first time that principals in the Senate are meeting since 2013 as against the Senate. I consider that a hopeful sign. Whether it will fruition or will come to fruition or not, we don't know. But I know that John is on the phone. He lobbies these things a lot from the Chamber of Commerce. So I'll be, I think that's my view on it for the time being. The second group of sympathetic people could be agricultural workers. I think there's much more interest for agricultural workers. And the third group of people which are now emerging is what we call legal dreamers. These are not dream kids or DACA kids. These are kids who came with H-1B parents. And they're supposed to be riding on the H-1B visas of their parents till they turn 21. And since the backlog in the employment regime, which is so long, they age out. And after they age out 21, though they may have spent last 15 years of their life here, they're asked to go back to their countries of origin, which is really unfair. So there is some sympathy for these legal dreamers. So I would say these are three subsets of the population which may be candidates for some small bore legislation.
Well, Moose, I appreciate your realistic assessment of the possibility for immigration reform. I'm curious to hear what John has to say about this, but we have one more question before we turn the floor over to our special guest from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and that pertains to the H-1B and the H-2B visas, which one of our participants describes as the crux of many of these difficulties. What would be the ideal first legislative step on the federal level to ease these issues? We have been talking about H-1B reform now for decades, I would imagine. And bills are introduced and nothing seems to happen. Everyone seems to recognize a need for reform, whether it's in the process for establishing eligibility for H-1B or in the number of H-1Bs available. So I'll throw that general question out for anyone who would like to tackle it. It's a huge one, but maybe we could spend just a minute or two on H-1B reform.
I feel like this is one that's in our wheelhouse, but like I said, we don't have the TechUnited New Jersey doesn't yet have the gathered any novel policy ideas. Other than, I think Jacob mentioned in the comments, raising the limit. The other issue that's come up quite a bit is predictability of extensions. And so that there's those relying on the program will know exactly what will happen. You may not help to highlight the difficulty of this issue, but like the Toronto tech scene has exploded as a direct correlation of the limit on the H-1B issue. It's cited in many press articles as look at what's happening here because immigrants can no longer go to the US, and so Canada is taking advantage of that. So I'm sorry not to have a great solution, but I would reiterate the dire need to solve this.
This could be an issue that would rise very high on the priority level for the Business Immigration Coalition in New Jersey to explore some specific reforms that we can advocate for. And it would be nice to work closely with you on that, Aaron.
I've just become a proponent of Moose's flexible 2-year cap plan because I think that sounds fantastic. If we were able to change the cap on a regular basis that in response to labor needs in the US, then that would at least give us a chance. And like I said, I'm not even having to deal with the cap most of the time, but students are, and they're going into those H-1B jobs. So it still means something to us as well.
I think one of the points that many of you have made, which really registered with me, is that we sometimes think of immigration as a win-lose kind of thing, that the more immigrants, the more American workers are going to be affected. But I think all of you have clearly explained that it's a win-win, that so many American jobs depend on the volume of immigration that's allowed into our country. And without, sensible immigration, you're also going to have domestic problems with the economy, which maybe we're experiencing now. I don't know to what extent the current difficulties are related to that, but it's something to consider. Well, thank you all for your insights and this discussion, which I think was very helpful in framing some of the important issues. Thank you, Moose, for joining us. And I am now going to turn the floor back to Catherine, who will introduce our final guest speaker.
Well, thanks to Pat and the panelists and those of you who asked questions. That was a very informative discussion. And now John Baselice will be pulling some of these ideas together, and hopefully we'll have reached some insights. John is the Vice President of Immigration Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. He works with Chamber member companies to form Chamber policy positions on various issues, and he advocates for sensible immigration policies before Congress and the executive branch agencies. Prior to joining the Chamber, John, who is an attorney, served as an advisor to Senator Rubio for over 3 years. He is licensed to practice in the states of New York and Florida. And John, take it away. What do you think?
Catherine, I want to thank the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition for inviting me here today. And I want to apologize for my Zoom, which apparently feels the need to put colors on my face. So this is just a fun time here. But I want to start by acknowledging the question that Jacob asked in terms of the H-1B, H-2B visas being the crux of the matter. I have a little bit of a different view on this because I think a lot of the problems that are associated with the immigration system, there are many. You can't swing a dead cat in the INA without hitting a problem. But I think most of them start with the green card system. You have 140,000 green cards that are made available each year for employment-based purposes. As Moose highlighted, you have, I'd say, roughly 60 to 70 of those go to actual workers, depending upon how you calculate it. Because it's, you use different data sources trying to figure out how many of the visas go to actual workers. Some people, they come alone. Other folks, they come with their spouse. Other people have kids. So like you think, you know, if you're coming with your wife and your 3 children, guess what? You're taking up 5 visas in the quota, but you're only getting 1 worker. That to me is the bigger problem here. So if I had if I were king for the day, or if I were, you know, the floor manager for either McConnell or Schumer, that'd be the one thing that I would write into an appropriations bill, because that to me would have larger spill down effects for other visa categories, particularly non-immigrants. Because if you look at the system holistically, you have someone who comes here to learn, they're going to college, they're here in F1. They're lucky, they get OPT, or they got a STEM degree, and they have OPT for 3 years. So they have multiple bites at the apple to get an H-1B. And then once they get their H-1B, then they work long enough, hopefully their company decides, hey, we want to employ this person on a permanent basis. And, you know, fantastic. They got in the green card line. If you could make the green card, I guess, you know, change the gauge on the pipe from like 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches, you get a lot more people coming through the pipeline. You won't have the types of traffic jams you'd hit in the H-1B category, because less people would need to seek to extend their H-1B over and over and over again just to maintain their spot in the green card line. And you'd have other spell-down effects on F1s, because guess what? More F1s would have more access to H-1Bs. You'd have less people trying to get in the H-1B category. You look at the recent data on H-1Bs, I think it was about 485,000 folks applied for the registration period this year, for a total of 85,000 visas. So you look at that, it's basically 6 to 1. 6 people are applying, only 1 people are getting in. 1 person's getting through. So the denials that Aaron was talking about, they're real. Because the vast majority of people that are seeking these visas in the cap every year, they're not getting through. So that's why, to me, if you fix the green card system, you'd get a lot of other help downstream. And for the H2s and the Ls and the Es and the TNs and the other visa classifications that employers turn to, depending on what industry they're in, you'd have less of the limited resources that USCIS has to expound on processing these. Now they have more time freed up for the other categories. So it would benefit everybody. That's just me, if that was the one change we got. Now, you can look at the Chamber's website. You know, we have worked on this for a long time here at the Chamber. Every time you try to look at just addressing immigration in isolation, it's a tough row to hoe. And that's why last year we launched the America Works initiative, because even if you were going to reform the immigration system, there are still going to be issues with regard to meeting workforce challenges domestically. And immigration can certainly help a lot, but it's no panacea. It's not a cure-all. You can't just be like, hey, we fixed immigration. Everything is, poof, now it's perfect. So we looked at second chance hiring issues. We looked at childcare issues. We looked at education, worker retraining, worker upskilling, that my colleagues handle. Thank God I don't handle those, because that would mean I have no time to myself. But the issue here is you have to look at the system holistically. If we're going to meet our workforce challenges, immigration is going to play a role. Certainly will if you fix the system. But it's not going to solve it all. But the ideas we had proposed, doubling employment-based green cards, getting rid of the requirement that we have to count dependents, so the spouses and children no longer have to count towards a quota. Getting rid of the per-country caps, which has been an issue. I remember when I first got up here in the Rubio office in 2011, that was one of the first things that we wanted to address. We want to double the H-1B quota. We want to double the H-2B quota. Also providing international students with more avenues to get into the workforce once they graduate. This is something that's being talked about right now in what's known as the BIA. This is the offshoot of the America Competes Act, USICA, what many folks are talking about as the China Competition Bill. And we have been working quite a bit to try to keep the amendments that were included in the House version into the final package. I can tell you right now, it's going to be very challenging. You have more and more Republicans publicly stating that they're opposed to including this stuff into that package. So if I were a betting man, I wouldn't see this sticking. But having exemptions for anyone with a STEM PhD or a master's that's going to be working in a critical industry, these are things that would certainly help, because it helps take people, and they don't have to apply towards the annual quota. Anything that helps get more people to increase throughput would help. Now, I think to piggyback off of what Moose said earlier during the follow-up discussion, I think that the Dreamer issue is definitely one of those that's a hot button one. Yesterday was the 10-year anniversary of what I'm terming the DOC-iversary. But the program's been around for 10 years. You've had a lot of people who have, they've come out of the shadows, and they've also made something of themselves. We don't want to basically pull the rug out from underneath them after a decade. I still think there are other issues like the H-2B issue. This is something that Lori spoke about earlier in terms of us getting cap relief each year. And while the U.S. Chamber has been very thankful to the administration, both the Biden administration and the Trump administration, when they exercise the authority that Congress has given them, per our insistence and the insistence of many other business associations that have members that rely upon these workers. But if you look at the data, in January, when you looked at the initial registration at DOL for labor certifications, I think it was roughly 10,000 individual applications for certification seeking 145,000, give or take a couple thousand workers. The annual quota is 66,000. And the Biden administration, to their credit, went the extra mile. They gave us 20,000 in the winter, they gave us 35,000 for the summer, for a total of 121,000 visas that could be issued this year. And that's still less than what's being demanded just for the summer months of this fiscal year. So you're talking about something that really needs to be thought about holistically, because the quota per Moose's contributions earlier, established in 1990. That's an economy that's dealing with Rolodexes and fax machines, and now we have smartphones and the internet. And the immigration system needs to adjust to meet the times in which we live. And the longer that Congress is unable to make some change, it's only going to make matters worse. But I think that's another thing where we've had some, at least up to this point, some encouraging conversations with folks on Capitol Hill and with representatives in organized labor who historically have hated these programs. AFL-CIO, SEIU, they're no fans of H-2B, and the United Farm Workers, they're no big fans of the H-2A program for agriculture, but they fill critical needs in our economy. And until we get to a point where we can start to, have an honest, legitimate conversation about, listen, we need to have more access to these visas. If we want to talk about redoing or reforming the labor certification process, yes, we can have an honest conversation about this. But historically, it's always been, well, there needs to be certain industries that are banned, or there needs to be certain industries that don't have access to this. And we see this in H-2A, where dairy and livestock production, they're not seasonal in nature. And because they're not seasonal in nature, they have no access. So they're always struggling for workers. In the H-2B context, and this played out when I was in the Rubio office in 2013, when we put the W program together, which was supposed to be the big catch-all guest worker program to solve all of our labor problems going forward. AFL was still insistent that construction was limited. You look at housing prices these days, they're not exactly going down. And maybe with interest rates going up, they'll finally level off a little bit. But with the housing crunch that we have, it's very difficult to be able to say, oh yeah, well, we need to build more houses, we need to provide more housing for Americans, but construction companies, if you're having a tough time finding workers, you can't look abroad for them. So I will leave it at that. I also looking at some of the other chat here that Tamar and Lori are putting forward with Catherine. I could not agree more with them in terms of the need for the business community to do a lot more in terms of educating their members of Congress. Mm-hmm. This is something that, with new members coming in and out, oftentimes you find yourself starting from scratch. And you also find yourself dealing with members who may have said something on the campaign trail they really don't want to walk back, or they don't want to revisit. So you kind of have to meet people where they are and try to get them to a position where it's like, yes, we understand you're worried about, workers' rights issues, or you're worried about, the culture in your area changing too fast, too rapidly. Understand that, but guess what? That's part of America. There's a labor market, there's a churn, and it's not like you look at my last name. I didn't come here on the Mayflower either. So I will leave it at that. And Catherine, if there's any other questions, I'm happy to take them.
Great, thank you, John. Thank you so much. Before I turn things over, I do want to remind you of the Immigrant Entrepreneur Award nominations that are open until the end of June. If you know a worthy immigrant entrepreneur who has built a business here in New Jersey, go to the New Jersey Business immigration.org/nominations, and you can just fill in a nominations form right there. And it's a very exciting program, and it's been run for 9 years now. And I think it really helps recognize the economic contributions that immigrants make to the New Jersey economy. Okay, so do I have Chrissy or Alexis? Alexis, hi. Before I turn this over to Alexis, Alexis Bailey, some of you may not know, is the Director of Government Affairs for NJBIA, which is, along with the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition, one of the two partners in today's premier program for the Garden State Immigration Policy Institute. And as I said, she's Director of Government Affairs. And she's one of our workforce New Jersey success stories, having started out as an intern at NJBIA. You know, we are always talking about how important it is for us to identify promising young people and bring them into our organizations as interns. She also worked for the New Jersey Public Charter Schools organization and the Kaufman Zeta Group. So we are delighted to have you with us today speaking for NJBIA. So Alexis, I'll turn it over to you to close.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for that warm introduction. Alexis Bailey, I'm Director of Government Affairs for NJBIA. I wanted to just take the opportunity to thank all of the panelists for sharing their insights and expertise on this critically important issue to the business community. At BIA, we hear from our members all the time, as everyone mentioned, about the workforce shortages across the state, across industries, and we know that having a robust immigration program will really help that. And as we all talked about today, we have a lot to do in our collective efforts, and we look forward to being a part of that. As Catherine mentioned, NJBIA is a member of the coalition, and we encourage everyone that's on the call, if you're not a member of this coalition, to get involved and help to move the needle and push this forward to help more immigration and more people to come to our state and to work in our state. I also wanted to thank Genova Burns for being a wonderful sponsor of this event today and facilitating this critically important conversation. So next, I just wanted everyone to know that the next event for the Garden State Immigration Policy Institute is going to be held in the fall, and we hope that you can continue to be involved, that we'll see you in the fall at that program, and that you will join the coalition and work on this issue with us. So thank you all so much for attending.
Thank you.